Welcome back, David. We are on, and I would like to pick your brain about how I could even call it the myth of doing more and basically too much of good thing being too much of a thing. Uh, I often come across people who don't want to take steady. When every time I post about something that I do, and then people go like, "Wow, how long did it take you?" Like 20 years. Literally, my strength hasn't increased for 20 years. Like, oh, so you're staying the same. I'm like, no, I'm always trying to progressively overload, but that does not mean killing myself every single workout. It means strategically plan what I do because stressors change every single day.
Yeah.
So, and I don't think that seems to be lost in a social media world because all you hear is you need to do more. You need to eat less, you need to move more, you need to lift heavier weights and train harder and this and that. And can you open up?
Yeah. Or a special, the special training program or whatever, right? A special diet, and you need to be all in on it and that sort of stuff. And it goes back to kind of everything that we talk about on here is if you view everything as a stressor, which you should, right? Whether it's emotional, physical, or environmental stress, then you start to realize that you can turn almost any stressor into a hormetic stressor. I even mean that for like electromagnetic fields. We've seen specific electromagnetic fields demonstrated by some scientists like Dr. Robert O. Becker and stuff like that, that can actually regenerate the body, right? There's regenerative currents, electromagnetic fields, but they are very, very small voltage and like to the point where you're not feeling it. And the duration is controlled, right?
And I
Everything can
think
be a
it's not
hormetic
even,
stress.
it's probably more important to acknowledge that it's a specific stressor, not, hey, if you use this voltage to heal this, and if you add more, it's going to heal quicker. It just does not work like that.
That's a good point that you just made right there. Adding more of whatever stressor, it doesn't matter the stressor. It could be a light stress, it could be a physical stress or an emotional stress. Just like or an environmental stress. If you continually just add more of it, that will eventually have a bell curve, meaning you've tipped the scale, and now instead of being a positive, it becomes a negative, right? So let's talk about some of these a little bit so that um, people can start to get a grasp. Let's start with sun exposure, right? Because a lot of people are going to be, of the mindset of, the sun is bad, right? But, if you listen to even a handful of the videos that we put out, you start to understand this. The sun, specific wavelengths in sunlight, are actually beneficial for the biology. Now, can you get too much sun? Yeah, and that's going to be per individual, right? Not me speaking to a broad audience of like, yes, there's too much sun. Everybody should avoid, more than 30 minutes of sun. For me, 30 minutes of sun doesn't do anything, right? Like I'm just, my skin is too dark to get much out of 30 minutes of sun. But for somebody who's, blonde hair, blue eyes, very fair skin, 30 minutes might be maybe a little bit too much because it's also a history of what you've done, right? And that's what people forget to understand. There's a history component to an adaptation, right? Um, so that has to be parceled out. Now, are there things that you can look into to see if you're on the cusp of creating too much stress? So going on the same rails of sunlight, right? And the answer is yes. When you get pink from sun exposure, that is the telltale sign that you're right on the edge of, maybe if you doubled the amount of time that you were, whatever that time took, right? For me to get pink from sun takes several hours, right? Probably 3 or 4 hours. So if I stayed out for another 3 or 4 hours, that might potentially end up being too much sun. But 3 or 4 hours before I get pink, I mean, that's kind of like the day that I've spent outside, right? For somebody else, they might start to get pink at 20 minutes, right? So then it's like, okay, if you double that time, you might start to run into problems. But 20 minutes means that you've gotten the effect that you're looking for. Let's go to a training stimulus, for example, right? If you're not able to repeat that training stimulus, and again, this is somebody that's natural, right? Not taking anabolics, not taking drugs or anything like that. If you're not able to repeat the stimulus 72 hours later, you probably did too much, right? Like if you cannot go in and do the exact same training at the same intensity or higher 72 hours later, you probably did too much in the first session, right? It's really
And
that.
I would like to add as well that, or not enough to recover, which is bigger
Correct.
problem.
There's a double equation right there. I mean, and that even is relevant to sunlight too, right? Like for example, my wife gets pink. My wife is kind of the best example of somebody who's very white. She is very white. She's got green eyes, fair skin. Um, she gets very pink very quickly, but for her diet is very high in omega threes. Her omega-3 index is almost always a 10, which is ridiculous because she doesn't, really do quite as much fish eating as I do. But the other thing is we never have blue light on at night, right? So her adaptation to getting that pink, like she can basically go outside for 2 days straight, get red like a lobster. And then by the third day, she's turning brown, right? There was no burning. She doesn't get burned because she has enough omega 3s in her diet and in on her skin that they immediately start to turn into docosanoids whenever she gets interaction. And because we aren't ever have like blue light on at night, there's never an effect of the skin is pre-damaged right before the sun exposure. And that's a perfect example, going back to the example of training, right? There's a recovery component to this that usually has to do with substrates in the diet and substrates in the body and habits that are not related to the stress, right? For example, sunlight exposure, the habit that is related to that, that doesn't seem like it is not exposing your body to artificial light or as little of it when it's not existent in nature. In the exercise example, it's what are you doing for the other 23 hours of the day that you're not at the gym, right? It's all of those components that are going to accelerate recovery, right? Getting proper sleep. That has to do with circadian signaling correctly and making sure that you can fall asleep efficiently, right? And that you're falling asleep at the right time to accelerate the cascades of growth hormone release at night and all of that type of stuff. So you're right. There's 100% two components to every stressor: the stressor and the amount itself, and the recovery component, the opposite of that. And what are you doing to maximize that? It's not just I'm going to train hard and that's going to cause all the adaptations. That's not really how it works.
We all used to think like that at the very beginning.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm only gonna get to 80 kilos, look like this, and then stop training, and to get to 80 kilos. God damn it! If I don't train for a week, I start looking same exact like I never trained.
Hmm.
Cycle repeats itself.
Yep.
The biggest I see from under recovery from like physical stress specifically is hydration.
Yeah.
Like
100%.
I had a friend visiting me, and he was like, "How much water do you drink?" We woke up at like 5:30 in the morning, and I had like 2.5 liters. And he's like, "I don't even drink that in a day." I'm like, "That's why you're chronic ill, tired, obese."
Yeah.
I never
Well,
thought
I think hydration is probably going to become the most important component to just about anybody's well-being. The reason for that is we live in a world and in a lifestyle that chronically dehydrates us, right? So let's talk about that a little bit, right? Um, the whole premise of like the reasons why sunlight works on us is because we're 70%, 80% filled with water, depending on our age, right? That hydrates components in the body like proteins and amino acids that form peptides like growth hormone, IGF-1, GLP-1s, basically every single peptide in your body is a protein that needs to be hydrated in order to work correctly, right? Um, and the hydration component also is the component of how communication happens in the body, right? So right now we're talking over the airwaves, right? We're talking over electromagnetic fields over long distances. In the body, the these well, let's back up a little bit. The airwaves that we're on is literally through the air, right? Through the atmosphere of the planet. Well, in the body, there is no atmosphere. It's water. It's water. The whole thing from your brain all the way down to your pinky toe is water. That's the substrate that the cells are using to communicate through. So if that substrate is not the right type of water, communication fades. Just like when you have a storm, the internet might go out or it might not be working as well. It's because there is something in the atmosphere that's stopping the communication or messing with the communication. It's the same concept. The more dehydrated you are, the slower communications happen in the body. And then it goes even further. There's potential damage that can happen, right? We know that if you're too dehydrated, kidneys don't work as well. If you're too dehydrated, the liver doesn't work as well. Brain fog starts to set in. Your body is heavily dependent on having the right amount of water in all the tissues, not just for the function of those tissues, but for the intercommunication of those tissues, so that the tissues actively are regenerating when they're supposed to be regenerating and not. The lifestyle that most people live in the modern world chronically puts you in a dehydrated state because sunlight hydrates tissues and most people are inside. The type of sunlight, the frequency of sunlight that hydrates tissues is red light. That's why red light therapy devices are very convenient to supplement that and to keep you from dehydrating more than you normally would. So that component, the hydration component that you just talked about, is a cornerstone to a lot of the stuff that we talk about. We're trying, without saying it, hey, hydration, hydration, hydration. We're telling you how to hydrate yourself as efficiently as possible. You wake up, get outside, you get some, because cold exposure, what does cold exposure do? It raises body temp. What is body temperature? Infrared light. You're causing a hydration effect by getting cold. When you go outside and there's infrared light freely coming onto your body, like right now, the first 3 hours of the day are mainly red light dominant for most people in the northern hemisphere. So you're getting free hydration of the body just by sitting outside in the morning and drinking plenty of water, making sure that your water is not fluorinated because that's going to dehydrate cells. That's really the main component of hydration, is making sure that there aren't toxins in, besides drinking enough, that there aren't toxins in that water like fluoride or chloride.
So what you're
Right.
describing now, a little bit of sun, a little bit of training, this and that, this stimulus, and
Mm-hmm.
when it starts to affect us negatively, it's stress. How can it be determined when you cross the line? Because they used to say like any kind of stress is depleting your immune system. Now we know a little bit of stress actually boosts your immune system, but that cutoff period of that boost is very short.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why for a very long time they couldn't even recognize that there is improvement in immune system. But if you prolong stress exposure, everything goes to gutter.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a kind of cutoff lines that people can determine, like I did too much? Like you said, after 72 hours, if you can't lift the same thing, you maybe overdid it. But
Yeah.
sometimes people will be overthinking that, like, and they come after another 72 hours and they still can't do it, but they didn't even
Mm-hmm.
train that hard. So
Yeah. In
they
terms of training, it gets a little bit
are
tricky.
dehydrated and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And in terms of training, it's a little bit tricky because as you advance, that 72-hour period before you can repeat becomes a little bit more messy because you have to accumulate enough stress to make the adaptation happen.
Is what
Right.
I'm looking for, is there maybe everyone loves gadgets? Is there maybe some kind of gadgets that they can look into and like, hey, my HRV is still stable. I probably
Yeah, yeah. So here's the biggest one, right? So I would, because this is, I see where you're going with this, right? Um, is there a thing that you can look at that tell you, hey, you are 100% prepared and you're ready to go, or the stressor is now an adaptation? The short answer is not something that you can look at a gadget. Like the HRVs are a lagging indicator, right? So number one, when they tell you that there is a green light, um, it's probably been a green light for a little while, right? When they tell you that it's a red light, it's probably been a red light for a little while. So they're not leading indicators. They're not something that I would use to tell you what to do tomorrow or today. that you haven't done already. They can only interpret the stress that's already happened, right?
Mm.
That's what I want people to understand about HRV. That doesn't mean they're not useful.
Yeah. So what brings me to a follow-up question: how much would you rely on something like Whoop Band? I've never used
I
it.
wouldn't. I would not rely on it as a leading indicator, meaning I would not dictate what I'm supposed to do today by the result that I wake up and look at my Whoop band for. What
Mhm.
I would do is, hey, my Whoop band is telling me, like for example, say the HRV is low, right? Um, then what it's telling me is I've already accumulated stress enough that's probably warranting a little bit of a pullback. Um, does that mean that I need to pull back today? Probably not. And that's when I would go in and look at how is my sleep scores been? How much sleep have I been getting? How much REM sleep have I been getting? If all of that's normal and steady for the past, I would say week or so, then I probably wouldn't modify my training today or even the next day or even for the remainder of this week. I would see if I'm on the uptrend already of that HRV reading. If I was using our HRV by itself. Now, having said that, do I use HRV by itself? No, I don't. So what would I pair this with? I would pair it with um, what I would call is just regular biofeedback. How do I mentally feel when I wake up? Do I feel groggy or do I feel awake and ready to go? That's by far number one, because that starts to tell me about sleep efficiency. The sleep scores and stuff that you get from these devices, they aren't accurate. They aren't accurate enough to assess your real time capabilities. The best thing for that is being able to mentally be able to tune in with yourself. That's where some journal time is going to come in very, very well, because the thoughts and the projections that you put out in your journaling actually reflect how well your brain is working, right? If you're
It's great what you just mentioned, that because I never checked HRV on my ring, and when I did, it shows me it's never been good. It's always been horrible. And at the same time, I went to hospital to do tests on my body, and they're like, "You're the fittest we've had here."
correct.
And I'm like, I'll rather trust medical, like proper equipment that's cost
Or just a medical procedure,
a
right? Like
couple hundred.
I'm sure you're talking about like VO2 maxes, you're talking
Yeah,
about
yeah,
grip strength, you're
yeah.
talking about all of these physical attributes that you can display right here, right now. They tell you readiness, right? So number one, right? If journaling and just mentally tuning in with yourself on how well do I feel this morning, that's by far more crucial than any sleep score you're going to get from this device, from a Whoop
Tell me
band or
about
something.
importance of pulling back, importance about taking a break, and why is the progressive overload, in a sense that people see at it, just add more weight and train harder, can literally diminish your results. And I have great results from making sure that every strongman I coach, I pull them back to train no higher intensities than 60% for like 8 weeks. And
Yeah.
after that, they increase their 1 RM by usually 20-30%, just ridiculous.
Yeah. So here is there's something in there that you mentioned that is key. The thing that you pull back on needs to be the specific thing that you're actually wanting to gain. So what you just mentioned is very important. People aren't really going to grasp it. These are strength athletes. They require to be stronger and stronger and stronger. So the progressive overload is on the strength vector. That's what you're going to pull back on, not the amount of days that they train, not the amount of sessions that they have per week or per month, but the intensity that they're training at, because the thing they're trying to gain is intensity, right? They're trying to gain strength, weight on the bar, weight on the implement. So you always tend to undershoot that or want to undershoot that so that the progression is always steady. The pressure on that particular specific quality that they're trying to gain is always there, but
Mhm.
it's always manageable. Right now, let's flip that for a bodybuilder where we know that, hey, if you do more work, the muscle is going to demand to be bigger and going to demand to have more fuel in that local muscle tissue. So now volume becomes one a slight, I would say, a slightly bigger stressor in a bodybuilding type physique. And so then the specificity there is the volume. You're not going to always want to add more and more and more volume. You're going to want to add enough volume that you're always seeing progress, but you're going to want to undershoot that volume enough that you're never going to overreach. At least that's how I try to program. Some people would say, oh, you just climb and climb and climb in volume, then you reset the volume for 3 weeks. You could do it that way. I don't think it's really more one is more useful than the other. That more depends on your personality of how
Yeah,
much.
I think that what you describe is probably more suited for people who travel a lot, and that's how I plan my own training.
Hmm.
Like I
Hmm.
know every 3 to 6 weeks I won't be able to do anything, so
Hmm.
I go both as a wall for
Right.
6 weeks, and then one
Yeah.
week is just like chill,
Yeah,
do
and
nothing.
and that's another key concept. The way that you pull back, that's dependent on your lifestyle, right? So again, it gets complicated, but that's why coaches are valuable, right? If it's a good coach, they understand these concepts of how you got to wash away fatigue, and the type of fatigue that you wash away is dictated by the specific goal at hand from the trainers, right? And this is just revolving around training, right? If we're talking about let's just say cold exposure, for example, right? If you're using cold exposure for tuning the circadian mechanism, so purely for helping you sleep better, purely for augmenting your mental well-being for the day and your productivity, then you don't really need super, super cold water. The intensity doesn't need to be high. The duration can be very short, but the frequency can be every day, right? We're talking 2 minutes of cold exposure every single morning and every single evening. Anybody can pull that off for just tuning the circadian mechanism, sleeping really well, waking up with enough energy
And
and mental well-being for the day, right?
I think it's good to add here. It doesn't need to be ice bath. It can be just cold shower.
Yeah,
Uh,
it can
I
it can
also
even
wanted
be
to
it can
add,
even be just a cold face dunk. I'm
yeah,
not joking.
I also wanted to add that there was this blow up that cold exposure is limiting your muscle growth, and I'm like, read the study. They dunked kids in ice within 5 minutes of completing their set for like 10 or 20 minutes. Nobody does that. Like there's not a single person on the planet that does that.
Yeah, but what I love that study, right? Because what it tells you is this. It is such an anti-inflammatory response that you get from cold exposure that it will blunt inflammation that you're trying to do, right? Forget the word training. When you train, you create inflammatory responses that will cause a immune system to respond, to break down tissues that you've broken down or stressed and rebuild them bigger and stronger. That's an inflammatory response. That whole chain of event is an inflammatory response. If you use cold exposure at the right time, you're going to dissipate an inflammatory response very dramatically. Now, think about that. That immediately makes cold exposure a very, very powerful tool if you're somebody who suffers from inflammatory responses or
Mm.
suffers from anxiety or anything like that that causes an inflammation of the body. When do you not want to be inflamed? Well, when you go to bed, you want to be as least inflamed as possible. Cold exposure right before bed, done appropriately, a very big tool. So, what that study actually did, instead of focusing on the title, right,
Yeah, yeah.
it physically demonstrated everything that we've been talking about cold exposure of how it can be used as a tool. That's what I really hate about studies. They literally prove the point of some of the other conversations around the subject matter, but they only focus on the title of we're doing this. And it's not even the researcher's fault or the study's fault. It's the people reading the studies
Yeah.
are not they're not putting this together. Like it does nobody any good to tell them, hey, if you do cold exposure after 5 minutes after you train, it's going to blunt muscle growth. Okay, great, we know that, but why don't you tell me how that's useful? Which is one of the highlights that I just said. It's actually incredibly useful if you understand that that's how powerful it is.
It's a full topic about studies as well, where one of my friends sent me like energy drinks blunt muscle growth, and I'm like, read the study. They didn't check any muscle growth. They checked cells of a mouse in a petri dish and dunked it in an energy drink for 4 days straight. What did they expect? But the title was energy drinks blunt muscle growth, and I'm like, what are you even talking about here?
Yeah.
So tell me more about like physiological like things. Somebody's training really hard, And what would they expect to see in blood tests if they were, so to speak, overreaching to the point where they might get damaged? I only have come across one person in my life, there are probably hundreds of them,
Hmm.
that overtrained. He could
Yeah.
not even run at low pace for like 6 years after that.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
crazy. His body literally gave up on him.
Well, so true overtraining, you're going to see effects in the blood for sure. You're going to see immune system going up, like white blood cell counts. You're going to see sex hormones coming down. You're going to see cortisol response really high, maybe through the roof, things of that nature. You're probably going to
You,
feel not
you
well
know,
as well.
like a specific numbers for somebody who's just overreaching and somebody who's properly overtrained. Because
Yeah.
overtraining
So
is
so
like,
if you're overtrained, you're going to see cortisol through the roof. It's going to be above range. It's going to be flagged. You're going to see immune systems that are flagged. So you're going to see white blood cell count that's above the range. Whatever, it doesn't really matter the lab that you use it. It's just going to be flagged. You're going to see potentially BUN creatinine ratio really really high depending on the type of training that they're doing because they're going through proteins way too fast. They're essentially damaging proteins at that point to the point where they're not recovering. And then before that, you're just not, your progress starts to slow, right? So you think, oh, progress is slowing down. So you start pushing harder and then it slows down even more. You're going to see, before even the blood work, you're going to see markers that you should be tracking not moving or going backwards. Now, if you are overreaching and not overtraining, right? So everything that I just described up to that point is what I would consider an overtraining type scenario where you're clearly not going to be able training as is, right? Now, overreaching is a little bit different. Overreaching, what you will notice is um, that blood markers are probably going to go in the correct direction for a little while, meaning you're going to have a proper response from the immune system, like a little blump, but then they come back to normal. In other words, if you're overreaching, I don't actually expect to catch anything in the blood work, right?
mm,
You might have a little bit of markers like maybe liver enzymes that are slightly elevated, but you're feeling well, right? Now, if you're overreaching, the main thing that I'm going to see that's going to be probably a leading indicator is grip strength or being able to hang from a pull-up bar less time, right? So your grip strength might take a little bit of a dip. Your soreness level might come up a little bit more for a week or two. That's telling me that we are in an overreaching stage, right? You might not be able to go in and train quite as hard in a repeat session. Things like that are giving me feedback of overreaching. And then, if you've constructed the training appropriately, whether it's volume based or strength based, then that overreaching stage for, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks, you pull back a little bit on the stimulus, right? Whether it's strength based or volume based. And then what ends up happening is you have this big compensation for the next 3 or 4 weeks where you're not doing quite as much in terms of the stimulus, whichever one you pulled back, but you're making more and more progress,
mm.
right? Because basically what you did is you amplified that response of the immune system to be able to target the specificity of the stimulus, and then you pull back the stimulus while the immune system is essentially overcompensating for a week or two of being stimulated at a higher level. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. To me, it sounds like to not get to this point where you're doing too much of a good thing, you just need to do what we already like suggest to everyone. Keep a logbook, keep a diary, and not just
Mhm.
what you're doing in a gym or whatever. How much time you spend outside? Hey, write it up. Like I was very precise when I started my first diary, and I didn't even know what I'm doing, but I wrote an hour and a minute at which I would eat every
Uh-huh.
day
Uh-huh.
since 2005.
Uh-huh.
And then every single time I would repeat it, I was like, okay, I felt like this. I was weighing so much. I performed like this in a gym. I ate this meal after training, this before training. Let's swap around. And even I made notes. Oh, this felt really good. This didn't feel good, and so on and so forth. So it means, well, one of my clients, he said, like, I don't even know what works for me. I'm like, that's not your job. It's my job. Just give me a feedback. I'll figure out what's happening. Uh,
Right, right.
you know, but to me, it leads to a question about how can you pull back somebody who's so obsessed with like just doing more? Because more often than not, I have to literally spend hours and hours and hours talking to people that you can't just keep eating less. It's just not good for you. It's like, or you can't keep just adding weight on a bar because you're just undercutting your recovery, and you're doing more is actually doing less because you're not performing at your best. What type of
Yeah.
conversation do you have there, or what kind of strategy do you implement there to show them that you are thinking that you are doing more, but you are actually doing more of a bad thing now, which at beginning was the right thing to do, but now it's not.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, usually the best way to convince somebody to do what you want them to do is to make sure that you give them the result that they're looking for. You know, the reason that they've been overreaching, the reason that they've been doing more by showing them. So let's talk about the weight loss example, right? For a moment. That one's uh almost always going to be the main thing. Hey, I just need to eat less, right? Because everybody's been pounded that into their head, right? And I'm not joking, especially depending on the time of the year, it'll be cold exposure or it'll be sunlight exposure, and it will be some modification to their training, right? And I will literally tell them, I want you to add 200 calories to whatever you're eating, right? I want you to add 200 calories, and then, but I want you like one that I use a lot, especially if it's somebody who doesn't know a lot of the principles that I teach and stuff like that. I'll have them, and most of them, right, are waking up at like 4:30 in the morning. They're going to the gym. They're eating like 1,200 calories, and they think they need to eat less calories because they're not losing weight, etc. I'm like, okay, let's think about what you're doing in the morning, right? You're not actually hydrating your tissues. You're probably dehydrating your tissues because you're going to a gym that's blue lit and you're doing it at 4:30 in the morning before the sun has even kind of come up. I'm like, why are you going to the gym? Well, it's because, that's where there's the equipment that I want or whatever, right? Or it's the only time of the day that I can get in before work, right? So basically, um, I'll go, okay, when do you need to be at work? 8 o'clock. I'm like, can you walk around your town right there, right? Like the block or whatever, right? Like, oh yeah. I'm like, how long will it take you to go to work? They're like 40 minutes. I'm like, okay, perfect. Wake up when the sun comes up instead of at 4:30. Wake up when the sun comes up at 6 o'clock, and I want you to go for a 40-minute walk outside. I'm like, that's the only exercise I want you to do. You're already going to the gym to do cardio. I just want you to do it outside at your own home, get a little bit more efficient, and then go to work, right? And then at work, I want you to take another little walk for your lunch break before you eat your meal. That's the only change I'll do. Now, to them, it seems like I didn't change anything other than I just had them do this almost the same stimulus in a different place. But what I actually did, right, if you break it down, I actually set them up to gain energy from the environment, which doesn't have calories, and I allowed them to eat more calories because I'm banking on that the energy that they're gathering in that morning walk and in that middle of the day walk, they're going to gain more electrons, more energy from the environment than they actually are bringing in. So even though on paper it looks like they're eating more energy because their calories went up by 200 calories, they're actually going to gain even more energy from sunlight, and they're going to expend energy anyway because they're still going to exercise, right? So I changed the energy equation, and I technically, right, like you said, had them eat more food. They start losing weight. All I did was change the environment that they're doing it in, right? And that environment makes them less stressed because now we're controlling cortisol through the cortisol response of morning daylight. We're controlling sex hormones and thyroid hormones through stimulation of the daylight during the sun. So we've started to optimize the underlying systems that dictate weight loss, right? So that's when you say you got to be specific about what you're trying to stimulate, that's the level of specificity that you need to get down to when you're having difficulty, right? But basically what it comes down to is when a client comes and they're of the mindset of I need to do more because I'm not getting results, it tells me that they have missed the specificity mark.
Mm. And
Does that make
specifically,
sense?
what you mentioned there, like going out midday when our body produces the most vitamin D. we know the higher your vitamin D, the more nutrients you're actually going to start storing in the muscle instead of storing
Yep,
protein.
100%.
So, and these are the little things that people kind of miss because it's never talked about. It's about
Yeah,
carbs,
yeah.
proteins, this and
Well,
that.
everybody says the word, but they're not serious, right? Every influencer says, specificity is king. Specificity is king. I just told you the level of specificity that you need to get down to
Mm.
on a weight loss perspective. It's not about calories. Calories are like 10 down the list. It's about energy, right? You got to be that specific. And so then when you start lining up specific lifestyle choices around energy gathering and energy dissipation, now you're at the specific level of energy, and now you can start making progress, right? And then I'll take that even further and figure out if there are anything that is draining energy from you at that particular level, like electromagnetic fields or living in an environment that is robbing you of electrons. That could be, near an airport and things of that nature, right? That's the specificity that you need to get down to for that objective. Now, if you're talking training stimulus and muscle growth and things of that nature, the specificity is that inflammatory response. So would I ever give anybody cold exposure after their training if their goal is to gain as much muscle? Absolutely not. But would I amplify their ability to induce the damage if that's what needed? 100%. How would I do that? Some cold exposure pre-training. Why is that? Because I want to amplify their dopamine response and their noradrenaline response completely naturally so that they can give maximum effort in the gym, right? So that's the tools and the specificity that you need to look at if you're a coach or think that you're a coach and you're talking about specificity. You need to get down to the electron and biological level in terms of what's happening for the stimulus that you're wanting or the result that you're wanting.
Yeah, my favorite recovery tool is because I work with like stupidly big guys, is guided breathing followed by cold shower after training. And it's like
Mm-hmm.
15 seconds of cold shower and around
Yeah,
7
yeah, it doesn't have to be
of
much.
guided
Yeah, yeah.
breathing. They're like,
And the reason
oh,
why is
my appetite
because
is going up now. I'm like, yeah, because you are so big, you cause so much stress, you can't eat. You need to get back to that rest and digest state.
yeah,
So
yeah. And that cold shower that you mentioned, 15 seconds, 30 seconds. That's enough to initiate a parasympathetic response, right? That's what you're wanting. But it's not enough. It's not enough to blunt the inflammatory response. You see what I'm saying? The you're being very specific with that tool. But if somebody were to just glance at what you just said and glance at a study about cold exposure post training, they're like, "Oh, they're not growing as much because they're spending 30 seconds in a cold shower." I'm like, "Yeah,
yeah,
you're not being specific enough."
they're not growing much, but on average, they're 160 kilos body weight.
Correct. You see what I'm saying? Like people do not understand the word specificity. If you're talking and using the word specificity, you need to be I'll take you to the cleaners if you want to get down to specifics, right? We'll go down to the minute level that changes from minute to hour to hour, and that will always be that way. It never stays static. So you have to be specific in the moment. That's where feedback comes in. That's where a weekly check-in comes in so that you can adapt and adjust on the fly. That's how you need to be able to do if you're talking about specific adaptations.
Yeah, I'll try to summarize this in quickly and let you go because I know I'm mindful of your
Yep.
time. Like too much of a good thing is problematic when you are only obsessing about pushing it harder. It sounds like trying to lift heavier, trying to do more cardio, trying to eat less, and all those kind of things will backfire if you don't look into managing your recovery. And first of all, before this even becomes an issue, I don't think a majority of people understand how important it is to learn to train intense, not hard, but intense. So train smart with a purpose. Like when I go to gym, funny, I went to my old gym yesterday and stacks there are so heavy, and I'm like, oh, this is a reminder why I made so much progress here because I can't even stack it all out. Any other
Yeah.
gym I go to now is made for current generation,
Yeah.
and I can lift full stack with one hand on most of them. It's obscenely weak, like setup now. But yeah, it's if you overdo something, it's gonna backfire. And being fit and healthy is about long, steady approach rather than hitting it with hammer for 6 weeks and then thinking that it's going to work out in long term.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about the long game and being specific over a long period of time.
And that specificity changes over time as well. So,
correct. Yep.
Thank you, David. I'm mindful of your time. I'm going to let you off and see you next video.
Awesome. Thank you.